I welcome the opportunity to speak on the agricultural and food supply chain bill. This legislation is certainly long overdue, and certainly myself and my colleagues in the Rural Independent Group did bring forward a motion as far back as 2020 calling for more transparency in the beef sector, and indeed calling for fairness for our family farms in order to protect them and in order to ensure their survival into the future. We know that the family farm got us through the bleakest times in this country. We know that in rural Ireland it certainly kept the lights on, and it still remains the backbone of rural Ireland. But the way farmers have been treated for decades has been nothing other than shameful. So I think now it's high time that we do introduce robust legislation to ensure very reasonable things, that farmers receive a fair price for high quality produce, and that they're not left in a situation where they can't plan or can't go forward in terms of their farm, which indeed is a business and involves planning. So it is only right that they get fair play. It's long overdue. And certainly, the farming organisations and the people who went out protesting for this to happen, they deserve huge credit here today, and I just want to acknowledge all of their efforts and indeed all of the farming organisations who brought this up with all of us TDs in this House from time to time. I want to note the very constructive and positive engagement I have had with the head of the Unfair Trading Practices Enforcement Authority within the Department of Agriculture, Mr. Noel Collins, and indeed his staff. They have always responded to my inquiries promptly and comprehensively, and I just want to acknowledge that here today. Indeed, in June of last year, the Enforcement Authority was able to inform me that while the number of complaints it had received to date was relatively low, this was not surprising given the perceived fear factor that comes from making a complaint. And unfortunately, this is a very real thing. We've all heard it from farmers ourselves about making complaints. What I wanted to clarify with Mr. Collins and his team was why so many few farmers and producers were not engaging with the new trading protections regime, and what kind of response it had received from the 5 major multiples. At that point, the authority had received just 6 complaints, but 4 of these were outside of the scope of the UTP regulations, and 2 were still at the scoping assessment stage. And that is an issue that I would really like to see addressed, Minister, in terms of making it clear to farmers and producers what exactly will be the scope of the new agency's remit. I do believe that certainly there are lots of questions to be still answered, and I would hope that you will clear up all of those questions. This is a new regime, and as such, a process of education around rights is vitally important to ensure that there is widespread engagement. I say that because it was also made clear to me in June that there was still a significant level of concern, and as I say, even fear among farmers and producers when it comes to having their rights vindicated or protected by the authority. I accept that the UTP authority did actively and constructively engage with farmers to try and address those concerns, and that is something that I certainly want to warmly welcome, and it is a step forward. Indeed, in its response to my queries on this matter, it very clearly stated that the Enforcement Authority would use every power available to them to ensure that any threat or act of retaliation by a buyer arising from a supplier exercising their legal rights would result in the strongest possible sanctions against the buyer. That is the key message that we need to get out there, and we need to instil confidence in farmers that this is going to be a robust regime that they can welcome. I also want to welcome the fact that we now at least have an attempt to address particular issues around payments being made later than 60 days for agricultural and food products, short notice cancellations of perishable agricultural and food products, and unilateral contract changes by the buyer. This may be of particular value to horticultural operators who, as we know, continue to struggle with the many crises that they are seeing impacting their sector due to the lack of effective peat alternatives. We hope to see some movement in addressing and preventing the risk of loss and deterioration being transferred to the supplier and the refusal of written confirmation of a supply agreement by the buyer despite the request of the supplier. On a related issue, I'm aware that the Enforcement Authority required major multiples to submit implementation reports, which should provide evidence of how they are ensuring compliance of the new regulations. But I want to see that aspect of oversight strengthened, Minister, and I'm sure farmers will. I know buyers had to nominate a compliance officer to deal with the Enforcement Authority, and I can only assume that this will continue under the new regime. And when we're talking about agricultural products here today, Minister, I want to condemn the disgraceful attack on Irish agriculture. Dublin buses parading misleading signs, misleading advertisements on their buses. I'm asking you, Minister, as Minister for Agriculture, to stand up for Irish farmers and stand up for the agriculture sector. You're in government with Minister Ryan, who's Minister for Transport as well. He's one of your colleagues. I would implore you to make sure that government makes urgent intervention here, and also that you come out to condemn this, because it's just not right. Farmers continue to struggle. They continue to struggle for a fair price, and now they're facing more attacks. It has to stop, Minister. Garv Magat.